How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode of Phil Talks Sports. On today's show, baseball takes center stage, and I brought in a heavy hitter today, baseball announcer and the voice of the Daytona Tortugas, Justin Rocke. Justin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. Hanging in there. How are you doing, Phil?
Can't complain. We're finally out of the, abyss that was no sports at all. So it's not what it used to be with the fans not being there, but I'm just happy that sports are back. That's all that matters now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. It was a very bizarre couple of months. It feels like it was like 3 years ago now at this point that we had no sports and our sole entertainment. I don't know what you were doing down in Florida, but I ended up watching a lot of the reruns of like old baseball, basketball, whatever old sport game they had on. That was the crux of what I was watching back in April, May, and June when we had nothing.
Yeah, this was one of the few times that it paid to be a pro wrestling fan because you actually got new content throughout this whole thing. So I know some people watched it out of sheer boredom. So that definitely helped a little bit.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing about it was there was a lot of UFC and boxing also
Hmm.
on the airways. My dad was got me on boxing as a kid. He never watched UFC at all, and I mean I'm not a huge UFC guy, but I'll turn it on if it's on
Sure.
and there's nothing else on. And it's like I got him to start watching that. That's how little there was going on in the
Oh
world.
yeah.
To find something to be able to latch onto and carry your interest for more than 20 minutes was a major accomplishment back
Definitely.
I feel like 4 or 5 months ago already at this point. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was the same with UFC once they first came back, and I've always casually watched it, but those first couple shows, I think the guys were just ready to hit somebody because they were very entertaining. I didn't think I would. I think I'd watch it for 20 minutes and 3 hours went by. So hats off to them. They made some entertaining fights at those early COVID times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that they kept the energy and stuff like that too. I mean, with no crowd, especially, we talk about it so much with, baseball, football, and basketball, but I feel like, especially combat sports, even if you want to rope in WWE and pro wrestling as well, so much of it is feeding off, the crowd and the emotions of that. And I thought they did an amazing job. So, hats off to them for getting it done and getting it done safely too, for that matter. Because we don't want anything bad happening to those athletes, as well as everything that's going on right now with baseball and the other major sports that are finally in swing.
Yeah, one last note on UFC that I had a kick out of is you could hear the cornermen clear as day on both sides. And at that point, it's like if you're yelling at a guy to take him down, what's the one thing he's going to be ready for? I think you get to the point where it's like if I yell this, I mean this. Like you got to kind of throw him off a little bit.
Yeah,
But
it was interesting to see how different corners were handling that with more than just UFC boxing too. It was a weird dynamic, but hopefully we're starting to work our way out of the woods.
it definitely seems that way. So one thing I like to do when I have a guest on for the first time is to give them a chance to kind of talk about their journey in their sports career. And people that watch the show, they know that I am a cameraman for the Daytona Tortugas in the summers and stuff. But Justin here is the main man. He is our play-by-play guy, our one-man production crew most of the time for that. So how did you get all the way from the New York, New Jersey area that you were from, and you're sporting the Yankee hat right now? How did you get all the way from the Northeast there to down in Florida and calling games for the Tugas?
So it's basically what I wanted to do since I was young. The joke I like to say, and I think I've told you this in the press box a couple of times, or at least you've overheard it, that when I was a kid, I wanted to be the next Derek Jeter, the next Patrick Ewing, Michael Jordan, what have you. And by the time I was about 12 or so, my dad beat into my head like, you're not going to be the next Derek Jeter. Plan for something else in your future. And some people might take that harshly, but I, took it as, well, if I'm not going to get paid to play sports, I might as well get paid to watch it. So, I started as a kid playing, video games in my basement, whether it was, the old NCAA football games, Madden, NBA Live, whatever MLB game I got my hands on. And I would call the games to myself in my basement and would do it for live games on TV too, into tape recorders like a lot of old broadcasters would do as they were growing up. And went to Penn State after I graduated high school, got involved with student radio there, did a bunch of different high school sports and State College my freshman year. Then after that, interned for MSG Varsity, which is a high school TV station. It doesn't exist anymore in New Jersey after my freshman year. So got some insight behind the scenes of, sort of video editing and sort of everything that works into making sports productions be successful. And then went back to school, did a minor league baseball game up there. The State College Spikes played their games there. They were a Pirates affiliate at the time, now with the Cardinals. And did a game with a guy by the name of Dave Walkovic. And he was a kid who worked in the Cape League a couple years before. And, did a game with him, and someone, our student general manager was listening and, was so impressed that they actually offered me the first home or the second home football game of the season, I think it was. They were playing at home against Alabama, Penn State was. And they asked me to host the pregame show for that game. So my first, working gig at Beaver Stadium was Penn State, Alabama.
No pressure.
My sophomore year, and it was surreal. And that was really sort of a jumping off point. That person, Dave, helped me get my first real job as a broadcaster for a team with the Bourne Braves of the Cape Cod Baseball League. I worked there after my sophomore and junior years, 2012 and 2013. Doing that Penn State football pregame show led, that was a couple months before the Jerry Sandusky scandal broke at Penn State my sophomore year. And they subsequently asked me to host the pregame show, the first football game back after Paterno was let go and, the riots and everything that happened.
That was versus Ohio, I believe, right?
That was the first game the next year. I actually did play-by-play for that game. The first game with Bill O'Brien.
Okay.
The first game back was against Nebraska.
That's right. That's right.
A game they lost, and it was one of the weirdest pregame shows you could ever do. I remember James Lofton, who was doing the game for national radio that time. He does former NFL receiver with the Packers and Bills, and I asked him, when he came on with us, and how's he doing? And he just looked at me and goes, "No, how are you doing?"
Yeah.
After everything that happened, it's one of those things that stick with you. So that led to, obviously doing the Cape League stuff. After I got to my senior year, Dave, who helped me get my job in the Cape League, was working for the Brevard County Manatees in the FSL. He'd actually been an intern my first year in the Cape League with the Daytona Cubs as their intern broadcaster with a great guy named Tyler Murray, and under the guise of Robbie Aaron, and ended up getting an internship with him as one of the assistant broadcasters in Brevard County in 2014. Took a semester off of college to go work that job, came back in the fall, graduated from Penn State. That was the same semester they brought back, they removed the bowl ban for Penn State, got to call a bowl game for Penn State. My last broadcast as a student, which was fantastic. And then worked for 2 summers.
Pinstripe Bowl? Was that Boston College? All right.
Yep.
You want to get one of those, right?
Yeah, the Pinstripe Bowl against Boston College at Yankee Stadium. So that was a surreal experience in and of itself, let alone the dramatic way in which Penn State won.
Mm-hmm.
But so ended up getting an internship after I graduated with the Tennessee Smokies, which is the Cubs AA affiliate. Worked there for 2 years in 15 and 16. Through that job, helped me get connected to somebody at West Point and became the broadcaster for Army's women's basketball team starting in 2015-16. And after the 2016 season, baseball was tough, trying to find a job just the way the market was and the way the jobs were lining up. There wasn't much there. And spent 2 summers working in rookie ball in the Appalachian League with the Johnson City Cardinals in 2017, then the Greenville Reds in 2018. And sort of through the Greenville connection, the Reds connection, the Daytona Tortugas job became open when Luke Morrow left to take the job up at the Citadel in South Carolina. And, some phone calls and some connections led to the gig there. And obviously 2019 was a lot of fun down in Daytona with the Tugas. And of course, 2020 took a slightly different turn, and still waiting to get back down there, hopefully for 2021.
Yeah, hopefully in a future time when we do this, we can actually be in the same room again. Maybe even the press box. That would be nice to That would be nice to see. And we probably could do a whole nother episode on your Penn State, your time there. But once you pregame Penn State, Alabama, every other thing's just got to be like no worries, right? Like once you do something on that level, it had to, have you ready for anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of jarring to be asked that as a sophomore. I've heard a lot about imposter syndrome with the NBA Finals with Duncan Robinson and Eric Spoelstra, and I was basically how I felt in that moment. And it was like, you're asking me. I actually told them like no at first. I didn't know I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, after a couple of days, I was like, this is stupid. And obviously, I did it, and that was a huge launching point for me. But yeah, it was kind of intimidating, doing that. Your first time being sort of a host of something of that nature. I'd done some play-by-play, but nothing really quite of that magnitude in a hosting capacity. But it was a great experience, and obviously ended up sort of being minute compared to hosting that pregame show after the Sandusky scandal, and trying to figure out how do you address it without making it being the overbearing storyline throughout the game.
Yeah, you kind of see that even now with like COVID. Like we all know the situation, we all know what's going on, and you can hear the announcers and broadcasters trying to make the story still about the game when you could see those first couple games of any sport, but we'll talk baseball specifically with nobody in the stands. There was, there's a lot of downtime in baseball. That's why I think it's one of the more challenging sports to call, but it was so hard to make the story not just about COVID and make it about the game. So I could see it being a similar thing with that.
Yeah, there's definitely some comparisons with that because obviously so many people at home right now are trying to watch sports to get away from that news cycle and the COVID anxiety and fear and just the general sadness around the world right now. So yeah, there's definitely some similarities there in terms of, you can't ignore it. You can't, totally, poo-poo it and push it to the side and pretend it's not happening. But in the same regard, you need to also, keep in mind people who are listening and watching, sort of looking for an escape. So it can't be everything you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we tried to push through with sports coming back, some people thought it was too soon. I was always in the wheelhouse of if you can do it and you can do it safely, it's worth a try. And here we are, baseball has made it to the postseason after it's truncated, 60 games. How did you feel as like more of a baseball purist than me? Let's say it's only 60 games. There was no people in the stands. You still call this regular season a success, just the fact that it got us through to the postseason, or would you have liked to see more from it?
I mean, I think you have to label it in some sense a success, especially after the way it started, with the Marlins and the Cardinals having major issues with COVID running in their clubhouses and how they may or may not have been introduced to the virus on the road at the beginning portion of the season. So it was, it was rocky at the beginning, and there was a lot of doubt about whether or not they would get to this point. So the fact that they made it to this, juncture, and that they're in the division series now, and it looks like they will get to name a World Series champion is a tremendous success. And more importantly, trying to find ways to keep these guys healthy. I know most teams have had at least, one COVID case within their players, as, to a degree is to be expected with how transmissible it is. But I think for the most part, it was a success. I know a lot of people are very skittish about, some of the rule changes they made for the season with the extra inning rule, the international tiebreaker rule, putting the guy at second base, which you've come to a Tortugas game you've been accustomed to for a little while now, as well as, the way the double headers went, more of a minor league style, 2 7-inning double headers. But I thought all those things made sense because it was all in the sense of trying to save arms. It wasn't like a normal season where you could just call guys up from the minor leagues and have people ready. You needed to sort of bend the rules a little bit and change the stipulations to try and be able to keep guys from getting hurt, and more importantly, not burning guys out for the long term. So I think they made the right, decisions with those things, and the fact that we're at where we're at now and that playoff games are going on. There's 4 games today. It's fantastic that we're actually at this point.
Yeah, that early on incident with the Marlins, like I was, I'm a Phillies fan now, kind of the Reds also dealing, working for the Tortugas, but I was ready to watch their series against the Yankees. My roommate at the time, a Yankee fan, and that whole series gets wiped out. And, we were wondering if things were ever going to get back on track. And now that same Marlins team is in the playoffs. So, like, that just shows you, that it was able to turn it around. And you mentioned a lot of the rule changes since we've had at the Tugas with the a man on second in the extra innings. I've become a fan of that now that I've seen it in person multiple times. I try to tell other people that haven't, they don't want to listen. I understand why they took it out for the postseason now, but like, do you ever see that rule becoming a mainstay in the major league? Because to me, it's won me over seeing it on the minor league level so many times.
I sort of see it this way. I kind of make the comparison to hockey in the NHL, and it's sort of like 3-on-3 overtime. It's great, and useful in the regular season. However, can't have it in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that being that it's sort of to me like, penalty kicks in soccer. You're winning the game without really playing the sport for the most part. Hockey purists would go nuts if they had the 3-on-3 in the postseason. I agree with that same sentiment. You can't really have it in the playoffs, but in the regular season, I think there is an opportunity for them to use it long term, whether it be starting in the 10th inning right away or doing something maybe a little bit similar to hockey where, hockey, they have a 5-minute 5-on-5 normal play before they go to the 3-on-3 overtime. Maybe play the 10th and 11th innings normal, and then once you get to the 12th, put the man at second base and go from there. So I think in some way or form it will be in the game long term. I don't know if it'll happen right away, though, in 2021.
Yeah, I think if you put it in there, like you said, the 12th inning or something, I'd even put that as, college overtime in football. Eventually you have to go for two. I don't think anybody kicks and screams about that because it's so far down the line. It's like, all right, eventually we need a winner here. So I agree with that. I totally understand it not being in the playoffs because it does minute the sport you're playing at that time. But I do think it would have its place eventually. So with this shortened season and the talent pool that we had, for the first time, I believe, we saw people go straight from the Tortugas straight to the show. We had guys like Tyler Stevenson, Jose Garcia, and I know I'm probably forgetting a few, but how cool was it to see guys like that you just called their games, less than a calendar year ago, already in the show? That's probably not something you would have expected, that time last year.
Yeah, no, it was a weird thing seeing how that all sort of unfolded. I mean, you're even seeing it now in the playoffs. The Tampa Bay Rays in Game 1 against the Yankees brought in a pitcher to make his major league debut who was pitching in the Florida State League at the end of last season. So it was sort of a weird caveat in 2020 that the fact that, you had guys like Jose Garcia, and he wasn't the only one that went from the FSL straight up to the major leagues. Alejandro Kirk did it with the Blue Jays. There's so many other names I could rattle off. It's kind of surprising. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was a shortened season. And, somewhat of it is, the element of surprise. They don't have a whole lot. There's more information on these minor league players than there was 10 years ago with TrackMan and Rapsodo and all these different technologies that track spin rate and exit velocity and all these different numbers. But it's still something being able to tangibly face somebody and be able to really, work and see their weaknesses in an actual format. So some of these guys, it's the element, like I said, the element of surprise, being up there and sort of seeing what they could do in a shortened season. And that, there's really nothing to lose. It's a 60-game year. And especially if you're a team that was out of it or had nothing to lose and hadn't been in the playoffs in a while. The Marlins have done it a lot with their guys. They had two of their, three main pitchers for the 2020 season out in Jupiter are on the Marlins NLDS roster in Trevor Rogers and Braxton Garrett. And, thought they might get up to AAA. Maybe one of them would have a cup of coffee at the end of the season this year. Same thing with Jose Garcia, who had a great spring training before the world stopped. But I think the 60-game season and all the different factors surrounding it definitely played a factor in allowing so many guys not just one or two, to go from A ball straight to the major leagues.
Yeah, seeing those stories, like we mentioned a few of them. I think even like Stuart Fairchild was another one I think might have got up there at some point. But when I saw that, it made me feel bad for places around the country that don't have minor league, because you don't have that story that I watched this guy play on a minor league park. So it's a very unique situation for the people that got to see it. And I don't think it's something that would happen, in a normal year. Obviously, they'd make several stops along the way. But I was pleasantly surprised by the performance on a lot of these former Tugas, getting, whether it be a smaller like Jose Garcia, who's still on the roster, that they were there for the challenge, and they made their presence known once they got there.
It just goes to show that how much talent there is in baseball these days. I mean, and some of these guys weren't even on the radar at this time a year ago, or were, talked about in small circles. And, I remember at the end of last season in Daytona, I was telling anybody who would listen that this kid's going to be in the big leagues, talking about Jose Garcia sooner rather than later, just based on the way he carried himself, the way he played the game, the way he approached the game. And it ended up being, true. The fact that he was able to get up there and was on the National League Wild Card Series roster for the Reds in the playoffs. And I think Stevenson, had some at-bats late in the season as well for the Reds, not as much as Jose Garcia did. But it was really impressive to see those guys go up and do it. But it's a testament to sort of the coaching that these guys are getting, as well as the sheer talent that is available in the game right now. I mean, I think one of the best examples is like a guy I brought up before with the Blue Jays, Alejandro Kirk, who I'd seen in the Appy League in 2018, and he wasn't even on their roster as a catcher. He was listed as a DH at like age 19, 20. And you're looking at that and going, how is that possible? And you see the kid rake. He raked in the Appy League. He was great offensively and defensively, for that matter, in the FSL last year, and was on the Blue Jays postseason roster as well. And there countless pitchers. I mean, the Padres added Ryan Weathers, who hasn't pitched above low A ball, to their postseason roster for the division series. And I mentioned Shane McClanahan with the Rays. But it was also bizarre because there were some guys that you figured would be locks to do that, like Wander Franco, who you may remember seeing in Daytona at the end of last season with the Charlotte Stone Crabs, the top prospect in baseball. Mm-hmm. And he didn't get an opportunity at the major league level this year, when you might have assumed he would, considering the chances some other guys got. Like, we mentioned Jose Garcia, Alejandro Kirk, Davey Garcia with the Yankees, Clark Schmidt with the Yankees, and so many other teams. The Mets did it with Andres Jimenez straight out of the gate, and they were surprising people to put him on their opening day roster. So it was interesting seeing the guys that they did put on and other top prospects who didn't get that same opportunity.
Yeah, definitely didn't follow the normal logic, but of course nothing is normal right now. So it's still part of the course, I guess. As these playoffs have been rolling on, we got to enjoy watching the Reds play in the playoffs for a whole 2 days, and now that party's over for now, at least. But at least they made it. Good, good for them. We're in the divisional series now. I was watching a little bit of the Marlins and Braves at work. Don't tell my boss, but and then the Yankees Rays. Game 2 is tonight and everything. So you're obviously a Yankee fan. Down here, it's a big deal because there's a lot of Yankee fans down in Florida, and then people do jump on the Rays when they're playing well. So that's a series that has a lot of people's attention. From my perspective, it's almost like the winner of that might be the favorite moving forward. But who do you see, if you had to put money on someone, who's your favorite for the remainder of the playoffs?
Straight out of the gate, I thought it would be, I was most impressed by the 2-1 seeds, the Dodgers and the Rays. That they've had the best regular seasons, if you want to call it that, since it was only 2 months long. Mm-hmm. But obviously things change in the postseason, and it's such a different dynamic this year because, they've only played for 2 months. And this is, for many of them, the third month of the season. I made a joke with my dad watching game 1 of the division series last night that in recent years, the Yankees' best month has been the third month of the season, June. Mm-hmm. And the Yankees' third month of the season now is October. And through the first 3 postseason games, they've scored no less than 9 runs and hit no less than 3 home runs in each game. And I thought the Rays, based on the way they handled the Yankees in the regular season, they were going to, beat them in 4 or 5 games, advance to the league championship series. Obviously, there's still a long way to go, but based with the way the Yankees have played the first two games against Cleveland and then last night against the Rays, was kind of eye-opening in terms of the fact that, they may be able to pull this off going forward. But in the American League, I think you're right that the Rays and the Yankees are really the two juggernauts there. Obviously, there's a lot of questions with the Astros, considering the fact that they're coming off the cheating scandal. Yeah. And more importantly, that their pitching staff is very beleaguered in 2020. Their only really, remaining starter from last year's squad is Zach Greinke. Justin Verlander is hurt. Garrett Cole's on the Yankees now. Lance McCullers has obviously come back and pitched for them in Game 1 against Oakland. In the same regard, the two teams they played, the Twins and the A's, are about as, snake-bitten of franchises you can get in Major League Baseball in terms of success in the playoffs over the last 20 years. So, anything's possible, but I think the Rays and the Yankees are the two, big fish to fry in the American League. In the NL, it's interesting. I think the Dodgers-Padres series is going to be really intriguing to watch. I think the Dodgers have the upper hand, obviously now that they have Mookie Betts. But it'll be interesting to see. The Padres are young, and, anything's possible. It can happen in a short series like that. In the same regard for the Braves and the Marlins in the NL, that was a weird one. Watching the Braves and Reds Game 1 last week, there were so many strikeouts. There were more strikeouts in that Game 1 Reds-Braves game than there had been in the entirety of the 4 games of the 1976 World Series.
That game was so frustrating to watch.
People kept telling me it was a good baseball game. It wasn't. Any game that features that many strikeouts and that many runners left on base, I think it was like a combined 2 for 22. The team's the runners in scoring position. Not good execution. Very good clutch pitching, but not good execution in those spots. And, it left me with a sour taste in my mouth of the Braves, but obviously they were down for the most part today, came back to win Game 1 against Miami. But they've got a ton of talent. Their pitching pitched really well in the Red Series against the lineup in Cincinnati that had been on fire going into that set. So I think it's interesting. I think, the Yankees, Rays, Dodgers, Padres are really, I think the 4 teams that may be the cream above the rest right now. But with the way 2020 has gone, and as I mentioned, with this short season, this is the 3rd straight month these guys are playing, anything's possible. You never know what team's going to get hot and go on a run. That's sort of, the beauty of the baseball playoffs in general, but it's going to be even more a factor, I think, this year because they've played so few games.
Yeah, I mean, you compare it to a normal year, and these guys are only in their 3rd month of playing. Their bodies are kind of like getting into gear now. Like, this is usually when guys play their best ball, and like you said, it's usually June, and now it's October. I know that Braves series has a lot of interest down here. I'm sure you've spent enough time in Florida to know that the Braves fans run deep through Florida because that team was in its heyday well before the Florida teams were either created or good at any point. We've seen one league crown a champion so far in this COVID era, the NHL and the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the question seemed to be answered for that. But for this, do you see, with the season being shortened and the way the playoffs are, do you see any sort of asterisk on whoever is crowned World Series champion at the end of all this?
I really don't. Obviously, when it comes to hockey and basketball, majority of them, their regular seasons were done by the time COVID brought everything to a close. And I think there is some truth to the arguments that both leagues were making that, that was going to be as tough a championship to win because everyone's had, 3 months off to recover, regroup. And it was sort of almost a separate season within itself. Baseball is a little more interesting because of the fact that, they played a truncated season this year. But it was a great point that someone brought up before the season even began. In 1981, the baseball season was split into 2 seasons because of a strike in the middle of the year. Mm-hmm. And much like we see in the Florida State League, there was a first-half champion and a second-half champion. That was actually the first time they ever had the division series in the playoffs. Not in 1995. It was actually in 1981, and that was sort of the precursor to making 4 playoff teams be a thing. a couple years, I guess a decade or so after that. And no one talks about 1981 being an asterisk, even though the Cincinnati Reds, who had the best record in baseball that year, did not make the playoffs because of the two-half system. They did not have the best record, in their division in the first half or the second half. So they were on the outside looking in, and ultimately the Dodgers won the World Series over the Yankees that year. But, that season, that the team with the best record in the regular season didn't get in the playoffs. There's no asterisk on the 81 Dodgers winning the World Series there. So if that's the case, I don't know how you can really put one on 2020.
I agree with that. And an example that I use for people, a more modern one that they might gravitate to more, is like LeBron's first title in Miami was a strike-shortened season because of the lockout. And nobody even remembers that, let alone bring it up. So I think there's been no discussion of that with the NHL, but you're right. Their season was basically over. It was just a matter of getting the playoffs under. This is the first league that had to put a whole regular season in this year. But I think as years go by, I was talking with my roommate the other day, like, we're going to watch highlights from this season and we're going to be like, why was nobody at this game? We're going to be like, oh yeah, that was the COVID year. Hopefully it's only one. Hopefully it doesn't bleed into 2021 activities. But I do think we will get to that point that we're like, oh yeah, that's why nobody was there that year.
I'm not so sure about that factor, in the sense that this has just been so enveloping. It's a little more than, a lockout or a strike or something that we've seen in the past with the NBA or the NHL or Major League Baseball. So I think it'll be a little bit different. I think we'll know right away, that was, the 2020 season, when you see those wacky cardboard cutouts behind home plate for certain highlights and things like that. But I do agree with the sentiment that in time we will sort of forget about the potential for asterisks. And to put it in perspective, I think there still will be a lot more asterisk around the 2017 World Series championship than there will be in 2020, regardless of who wins it.
I think that's a good point too. Do you know anyone that went out of their way to get one of those cardboard cutouts in any? I know we saw Sheldon and Shelley in Cincinnati, but like, do you know any diehard Yankee fans that went out of their way and did it?
See, that was the weird thing. I never understood. There are certain teams that did not do the cardboard cutouts. Mm-hmm. The Yankees were one of them. The Mets did. The Reds did it. So many teams did, and I don't get why the Yankees didn't do it. I don't get why any team didn't do it. To me, as someone who's been a broadcaster and has seen sort of the inner workings of a franchise, particularly on the baseball side, I'm not a money guy. I can't speak to finances, but it seemed like the easiest way to make revenue in a year that is impossible to make revenue because of the lack of fans. I mean, the cost of production for those cardboard cutouts has to be pennies on the dollar.
Oh yeah.
And for whatever they were charging, which is probably, maybe anywhere between 30 and, 100 some odd bucks to get it made, that's a tremendous profit margin on that. And it just made no sense. I guess, sometimes with the Yankees, it's an image thing and they thought it might be too, amateur hour with the cardboard cutouts. But I just saw that. I thought that was a great idea that teams came up with to try and, at least add some sort of flair and uniqueness and make people somewhat feel like they're involved in the games. I know the NBA has done a great job with, virtual fans at the bubble in Orlando throughout the course of their restart. So, yeah, it was very weird to see teams not do that at all. But, that part was just strange to me.
Yeah, I didn't realize, I guess, that the Yankees didn't do it. I know when it first started happening, a friend of a friend looked into it. She was living here, but a Dodger fan. And behind home plate, your cardboard cutout was like $250. But that's like right behind home plate. So, I mean, if you're a diehard Dodger fan and you got the cash, I don't know why you wouldn't do that.
Absolutely. It's free marketing. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I did not know anyone, that went out front and actually said they did. Actually, that's not true. I do have a family friend that did do it with the Mets. They have season tickets, and they did do it with the Mets. I'm not sure exactly where their cutout was, but I know that Tracy Neporn had a cardboard cutout somewhere at Citi Field in 2020.
Well, shout out to Tracy then. That would have been a good thing to do too. If you have season tickets, yeah, you can't go to any games, but you get your cardboard cutout. I think that should have at least been part of the deal. I don't know if you saw. I think the team that's done it best to jump sports. If you saw the Denver Broncos put the entire South Park community in a
Yeah.
section. I don't think you're going to beat that at all.
Yeah, that was great. And one of the other things I thought was really well done, I think the Pirates were the ones that did it. Like, there may have been a few other teams that did this as well. But if like a foul ball or something hit your cardboard cutout or ended up at your seat, they would mail you that ball,
Oh wow,
which I thought was a great little caveat there.
Mhm.
And also the thought process, and I know many broadcasters have talked about this on air over the course of the last few months, is, what's going to happen with all these foul balls and home run balls that are left in the seating bowls of these stadiums throughout the course of the season. And, for the most part, they're not picking these balls up
Mhm.
and either bringing them back or cleaning them or whatever. So, like, it could be like a scavenger hunt when these stadiums reopen to the
That's
public
true. Yeah.
in a year or so, whenever it is, finding random balls that were hit there during 2020.
I mean, that happens here and there at the Jack. Even I've been, coming back up from the press box and just seeing one that somehow somebody missed. So I could imagine when there's nobody in the stands, too. Before we get out of here, you mentioned earlier that you're a proud Penn State alumni, and you got a few more weeks before your Nittany Lions take the field again. But I figured we just talk about the fact that the Big Ten did reverse their decision and will be playing football this year. I mentioned on a previous episode that I applauded them for kind of admitting they jumped the gun and did the necessary steps to play this year. They could have just been, stood on their stance and not budged. So, like, I applauded them for making the change. How do you feel about Big Ten being back in a few weeks?
It was a roller coaster. I mean, I obviously it'll be great to watch Penn State football
Mhm.
when they come back on October 24th. But I'd be lying if I didn't say my initial thought was, "What are you doing?"
Mhm.
when they decided to come back after they were so staunchly, promoting, the idea that they were going to play in the spring and not play in the fall and take the risks. Obviously, a lot of players and coaches came out and wanted to play this season for their players. I know Michael Parsons, who's Penn State's best player, still opted out
Mhm.
for the season, and I know most of the Big Ten guys have opted back in
Yeah.
uh, for the upcoming football season. But in the same regard, um, for the most part, from what I've heard, is there haven't been many issues with COVID and stuff like that on the Big Ten campuses now. With at least when it pertains to the football teams, I can't speak for the individual campuses themselves, but I just want to make sure that the players are all right. It's one thing when it's professional sports. It's your living, that's your job, that's your life.
Yeah.
There's only so many years you can do that. When it comes to college athletics, until these guys are, isolated as, you're basically viewing them as employees here.
Mhm.
There's, so many instances where schools and campuses have sent students home because of outbreaks on their campus. And you're going to have these students stay to play sports, to make money for the school, but you're not going to compensate them for their time. So it was sort of a tricky slope there. And, I still have a little bit of mixed emotions about it, but as long as they're able to do it safely and, the players, the coaches are able to keep their families and themselves healthy and safe, then, more power, to them and to be able to do it. And that's just my biggest hope is I hope that they're able to get through it and everyone's able to stay healthy. There's a lot of talk about cardio. I'm drawing the blank on the name of
Yeah, but the
the,
heart disease.
the heart valve condition
Mhm.
that has popped up, which is a common, from what I've heard, is fairly regular for things that happen after viruses. But as what you may remember or have seen with Eduardo Rodriguez, who was a pitcher for the Red Sox, who was on the World Series team a couple of years ago, he missed the whole season because of a heart issue that resulted from COVID. So, in the same regard, it could screw up these dudes' careers in that factor should they get COVID, especially in football, a sport where you're exerting yourself a lot more than you necessarily are throughout the course of a baseball game. So
Mhm.
there was definitely concerns. Obviously, so far, the first few weeks have gone all right. Working at West Point, I know they've done a tremendous job with their athletic programs, particularly with the football team. I think they're a little bit, the military academies are a little easier to do that because when you're superior, your general, your platoon leader says, put on a mask, you put on a damn mask.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and obviously we've seen some issues with that, especially with fans and coaches on the sidelines, not just in college football, but in the NFL as well. So, you know, I'm still a little skittish on it to really, wrap up my point there. But as long as they, keep everyone healthy and safe, then, you know, go for it. And I just hope that they're able to do that.
Yeah, I share a similar, I was happy that UCF would be playing this year, and I didn't go to the first game. I did roll over my season tickets for next year, but if all goes right, I want to go to at least one this year. But you've heard a few, I don't know if you know about the SMU in Memphis,
Yeah.
The SMU situation where they made the students leave because they were not abiding by the guidelines. And obviously, if you care at all about your school or your program or your team, you want what's best for the players more than them playing football games. So as long as things stay, I agree. I hope it works, but you got to do it safely.
Yeah, and that's the other weird aspect of it. You bring up the fans, and to me, as someone who grew up in New Jersey, and I have to keep in mind for those listening, college football is not a thing here.
Right.
No one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares who plays the national championship game. No one cares about who wins the Alabama-Auburn game. No one cares about, the world's biggest tailgate party between Florida and Georgia. It's not even on the radar.
Yeah.
So for me, going to Penn State, that was my introduction to college football. My dad never went to a college football game until the first night game my freshman year against Michigan on Saturday Night Football. And both of us, I told him after I went to my first game, which was against Youngstown State, not even a D1 program. They are D1. They're FCS, not.
Yes.
They changed the rules. I know that. And that was my first game, and I told him, like, this is not anything like any NFL or football game you've ever been to. So much of college football is the fans, the atmosphere, the tailgating. It's so much more than just the actual game that is being played for those 60 minutes on a Saturday afternoon or evening, or Tuesdays if you play in the MAC. Shout out Kevin Field.
Yeah.
But so there's something that's going to be – it's just a weird factor. The Big Ten's going to play this season with no fans,
Yeah.
Beaver Stadium is going to be empty. The Big House in Michigan's empty. The Shoe at Ohio State, empty. The list goes on and on. So that's going to be a whole other weird factor about it. The lack of fans or the limiting of fans in most situations during the college football season when they're such an integral part of the atmosphere and the game day experience and the success and failures of their teams. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit, Ohio State grad, big Buckeyes guy, talks about, the atmosphere at Beaver Stadium on a whiteout. And just countless people of football. One of my things, like I said, college football is not a thing where I grew up.
Right.
I would love, everyone talks about going on tours of, like they want to visit every baseball stadium, every basketball arena, so on and so forth. I kind of want to do that with college football. That's to me, the experience is, working in Florida, working in Tennessee and seeing, SEC, game day experiences from that realm. I would love to go to Nebraska or Notre Dame, Oklahoma, all these different places. It's such a factor of college football, the college football experience that, that was also part of why I was like a little iffy on it, that, it'd be like, it's not the same as playing, baseball or basketball in front of no fans.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned just the difference. The experience of college football is different than even the NFL. Like living in Florida, you do have the advantage of there's a bunch of bowl games here, so you get to watch teams you wouldn't normally see. My first college football game ever was Penn State LSU, Capital One Bowl, Joe Paterno's last bowl win. That was an experience. Seeing Florida State played Notre Dame in the E.J. Manuel era in the Champ Sports Bowl. Just seeing Notre Dame play, even though it was here in Florida, it was an experience. So it's just something different for sure about college football. Even if you're a diehard NFL fan, it just offers something different.
Yeah, no, that factor is just so tremendously different than anything that you'd ever expect. I mean, growing up, going to Jets games at the old Giant Stadium, we had season tickets when I was a kid, and I mean, we knew the people that sat around us, when I was really young, and it's just a totally different animal, and it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be weird this fall seeing empty Beaver Stadium, empty Ohio Stadium and stuff like that. But I think that will be one of the more interesting things, more than any other sport, for when these stadiums are finally allowed to be back at full capacity. Uh, when we eventually get to the post-COVID world, it's going to be insane. It's those ticket prices for that first game back, where everybody's allowed and the stadiums can be rocking from USC to LSU to Clemson to Penn State, to Florida and beyond. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, and you mentioned the ticket prices already. Like the few teams that are doing it, my season ticket package that was supposed to have 7 games. If I wanted to roll it to this year, we only have 4 home games, and it would have been the same price. So that's a good, indication that the prices are high. I do think there'll be some people, a small chunk of the population will be a little skittish to get back to stadiums, even when you're allowed. But I think a large part, especially in college football, you hear the cringe all the time in the South. It just means more, which I cringe every time I hear because I don't know that that's always true. But yeah, it will definitely be crazy. You mentioned going to the Jets games and stuff growing up. I think this is a great thing to end on. So my whole family's from Long Island, and I have Giants and Jets fans in my family. I kind of got tugged on both sides, which is why I rebelled and became an Eagles fan. So I ask you, what is it like growing up in New York and that moment in life where you pick the Jets or the Giants? I assume it's similar with the Yankees and Mets, but I think it's even different with football.
It's different. Like most people, you sort of take after your parents.
Mm-hmm.
It was different for me with baseball. My dad's a Yankee fan. My mom's a Met fan.
Okay.
I argue if I was born in 1982 as opposed to 1992, I probably would have grown up a Mets fan, because they were the kings of the town in the 80s. With their teams, the Yankees didn't make the playoffs from 81 until 95 when I was 3. So, the fact that the Yankees, were at the height of their powers when I was just starting to watch baseball and get into baseball is the reason why I ended up picking the Yankees predominantly over the Mets. I don't, like some Yankee fans, I don't have a hatred of the Mets. I'm not allowed to, because if I say anything negative prolonged against the Mets, my mom threatens to kick me out of the house.
There you go.
One of my favorite stories is my introduction to Jewish guilt and just guilt in general was Game 3 of the 2000 NLDS. We came back from a night at dinner. Benny Agbayani's up against the Giants in like the 13th inning, whatever it was. And I made some comment that he stinks. And like the inning's over. My mom went upstairs, locked her door, and like 3 pitches later, Agbayani hits a walk-off home run.
Oh, jeez.
Like 7-year-old, 8-year-old Justin having to go up and apologize for bad-mouthing Benny Agbayani.
He doesn't stink, Mom. Sorry.
Yeah. So it was different. Both my parents were Jets fans, so there was never a doubt as that I was going to be a Jets fan. Same thing with basketball. It wasn't really until I was probably about 10 or so that anyone was a Nets fan when Jason Kidd finally, led them to the finals in back-to-back years. So it was a little bit different with football. That the Giants were never an option. The Giants were always the enemy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do feel from what I know from my family members that, like, there's plenty of people that are Giants fans, but you almost, like, if you have the underdog mentality, you almost went with the Jets. If you wanted the more secure thing almost, you went with the Giants, I guess would be a good way to put it.
If you went with the Jets and you had an option, then you just are a masochist. I mean, that's the best way to put it. I mean, it is not an enjoyable experience. I've made this joke, especially in the last week or so.
Yeah, it's been rough.
The way the first 4 games have gone, there are only 2 fan bases in the NFL right now that I feel sympathy towards. And one of them I'm still iffy on is the Browns and the Lions, because they're the only 2 teams that have been more inept over the entire tenure of the NFL than the New York Jets have. I mean, You're
And
an
up
Eagles
until
fan.
recently, I would throw the Bills in there, but they are luckily, good for them,
Yeah,
are doing well.
there's definitely some for the Bills, but in the same regard, they like went to 4 Super Bowls in a row,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jets haven't been to one since my dad was 15, 14 years old.
But I'm
It's
sure when Jets and Bills fans argue, Jets fans can at least say they do have the one ring, so they do.
that is a thing. There is the ring, but it is a long, long time ago. It's bad when at your bar mitzvah, when your dad gives his speech, he goes, "I hope someday you get to watch the Jets in the Super Bowl on a channel other than ESPN Classic."
I
And
love that. That's great.
and and through my bar mitzvah is now 15 years ago, and still not happening, and it doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon either.
Well, I mean, as someone who, for the first 15 years of my football fandom, the Eagles having the heartbreak in the Super Bowl in 04, I can tell you that it's physically possible to happen. Your team might fall off the table right after, because that's what I'm dealing with now. But it is possible that it happens.
Still the best team in the NFC East, however.
That's true. That tie really helps us out right now.
By a wide margin,
Yeah.
I will go to say it's not very close. The Washington and the Giants are a mess, and the Cowboys defense might be worse than the Jets, which is an accomplishment.
Yeah, at this rate, I think the number one pick is coming through New York. It's just a matter of which New York team it is.
I'll be honest. I do not see the Jets winning a game this season. They may sneak one out against the Dolphins, like at some point,
possible,
because they play them like back-to-back games for whatever reason, or back-to-back weeks because of the weird scheduling it is. But they are.
Rocke is starting for the Jets this week, so
that's what it seems like. Anything's possible with Adam Gase, but they are a train wreck and a dumpster fire combined into one right now in 2020. Their offense stinks, their defense stinks, but Sam Ficken, is our MVP right now, knocking down field goals because that's the only way we can score.
I was going to mention that earlier when we were talking about the bowl game that he won against Boston College. That was
yeah.
Him.
That was one of the weirder things is remembering. If you're a Penn State fan, you remember the Sam Ficken game against Virginia where he missed 5 field goals, and the second game of the season under O'Brien, and they dropped to 0-2, and it felt like the sky was falling. And then he ended his Penn State career being on the mic. Of him, knocking the field goal to send him to overtime, and then the extra point to win that game against BC. He's a really interesting story, and someone at some point is going to do a long form piece on him. It's going to be great, from the guy that was, a pariah in State College to being an NFL kicker for multiple seasons now. It's impressive.
Yeah, definitely a great way to end his collegiate career, and probably also a great way to end a podcast. So, Justin, I want to thank you for taking time out to do this. I know you probably want to get to that Yankee game here pretty soon. So just real quick on the way out, let everybody know where they can follow you on social media so we can hear some of your calls throughout the year for West Point.
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Justin Rocke. It's spelled Rocke, all one word. Really easy. Helps having a unique name like that. You can follow me on Twitter, and I'll be sharing all the stuff throughout our baseball season. Obviously, you can always follow the Daytona Tortugas at Daytona Tortugas or at Go Army West Point. They sometimes share a lot of the stuff that we do in the broadcast booth up at West Point. And looking forward to getting back down there to Daytona and calling some baseball games and doing what we do best, Phil, at the Jack.
Yeah, hope so, man. We're lucky to have you down here, and hopefully next summer, 2021, we'll be rocking it again. Thanks again, guys. And for everyone listening, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. I'm still on that hunt for 100 subscribers. I'm only like 2 or 3 away. So anyone that can throw that in there, that'd be helpful. Thank you guys for watching and listening to Phil Talk Sports, and we'll see you next time.